So today I received documents as to, it took me a little bit longer than normal to pull the reports for all the annexed estates of a few key individuals that I wanted to look into. One of them being the CEO of Akamai, another being Nancy Wilton. She was the founder of Cybertech and then went on to be a longtime executive at IBM. And then her father was the founder of the Texas company. And he held title to quite a bit of mineral rights and land and permits and patents in the drilling oil industry. He actually won them from Standard Oil. And as it turns out, he'd long been a target. The U.S. might say, oh, the Sherman Act, we broke up Standard Oil. No. The United States, Ohio actually did one thing for us. They granted Harry Wilton his patents, and he moved to Texas. And it was like literally the next week that Standard Oil creates dozens of entities, shell entities, you know, the Texas Corporation, anything that they can use to assume the identity of Harry and then basically take those patents. Because the goal was, you can't really tell Standard Oil no, is what I would come to find out. But so I get all of Nancy's annexed estates, and Nancy just passed away within the last few years, but she suffered from dementia at the end of her life, and she had no children. And I couldn't believe it. I mean, sit down, everybody, sit down. I not only know a lot about platform technology, I know a lot about financial law, you know, what the SEC requires if you want to play ball as a public company. Yeah, you can't just go willy-nilly, you know, screwing around with Russians and all this stuff on company time when people's investments, I mean, people's 401ks, the retirement, it's on the line. But, you know, Nancy's, I immediately saw a boatload. I mean, we're talking so much money that I was like, what is happening here? But they aggregated her father's securities as well as a bunch of Steiner and Stoner securities through Nancy. But I didn't realize that Nancy, in the late 60s, after the death of her mother, all part of the plot, Helen, who also had annexed estates created. Oh, and by the way, these annexed Social Security numbers, I actually saw a pattern that the majority of them were actually, even if they're used on probate estates that were just opened ahead of 9/11, they were originally granted out of Texas. And so I go and I see, can I trick them and see if I can retroactively see what other Social Security numbers were issued by the same attorneys or same user login? And they fell for it. And that's where the real horror story happens, though. But I come to find out that a lot of Nancy's assets go through Cybertech, which was a company she founded that specialized in detecting misuse of Social Security numbers, misuse of the Death Master Index. It was geared towards the insurance industry and a revolutionary software for detecting fraud and fighting kind of terrorism on U.S. soil, if you think about it. Because now that I understand what her company and what her software did, she was very much aware that people took out life insurance policies on her mom. I'm 100% positive about it. But Akamai and her company, you know, these tech companies, the United States just announced sanctions against anyone and any company that attempts to steal U.S. trade secrets. We will not stand for it, and you will be prosecuted to the highest extents of the law. Oh my God, BS. Well, that's why I wanted to bring this up. So Akamai would be the #1 worst technology company to have been hijacked ahead of 9/11. If you're not familiar with what Akamai does, they won the bulk of the Y2K contracts and still support 100% of technology on the Department of Justice and a few other sites. You go there and it says, powered by Akamai. Well, their CEO was having securities converted and liquidated no different than all of these other individuals. And they start liquidating his securities 6 months in advance. That's why I was like, did he die in 9/11? Yes. He was on the first plane that hit the World Trade Center. And then if you look at what Akamai's got going on now, they just signed like all these non-prosecution agreements after all of this, like, you know, securities fraud and things going on and distributing payments to China. Why would the SEC of the United States be signing non-prosecution agreements with Akamai? And maybe they seem like a credible company, but what seems like a credible company might not be owned by the same entities, and it might not be under the same mission. And that's where kind of the intellectual property laws are way, way, way. I mean, not to mention 9/11. Let's speak of 9/11. Among the other Social Security numbers that I happen to find, and here's a whopper, I audited 2.9 trillion to like the most anal audit I've ever done. And here's just an example of a whopper. It's called Allied Group. It's a fake entity that was created for the sole purpose of merging with Nationwide, which was a public company at the time, ahead of 9/11. It's 300, oh no, it is 408 billion. See it? In securities. These are set up to basically partition, and then I can show you, just no different than the cyber tech intellectual property. They're set up to liquidate on a schedule. And that's what made it kind of really jarring, I think, for Donald Trump. I couldn't believe, I'm like, all right, listen, leading up to 9/11, by Monday, the way that this was set up, and I was explaining to my friend from a technical perspective, the world should have known, like, there's something going on, like something really, really, really bad going on. And he was like, oh, they did. Donald Rumsfeld said something. There was like 2.3 trillion. I was like, 2.9, but who's counting? $2.9 trillion. And the difference between what they audited and what I audited is I included the assets that were liquidated from George H. Dunlap's estate with the approval of George W. Bush and Dick Cheney. And I know that they approved it because they issued liquid funding and bailout. Liquid funding was created for the sole purpose of liquidating. Liquid funding was liquidating funding. I love how Epstein is just so literal. And, you know, Allied Group Incorporated out of Des Moines, Iowa, backdated to 93. This is backdating these shares as if they accepted them in 93. Everything begins in 96 with Epstein, but it's 97 that, you know, upon the death of, I didn't know this, but I used technology to tell me this, but I knew something happened in September of 1997. Big time. Big time. That was a big one. Like, big time. Big time. Like, oh my God, who died? That would be Princess Diana. Well, they took out a bunch of life insurance policies on her life ahead of time, too. It's part of the plot, and the CIA historically had these life insurance companies and these insurance entities shut down not once, but again in the 80s with Desmond. He's a UK guy here. And I only bring that up because I look and guess what else is seized on, you know, cyber tech and some of these other trademarks? Dunlop. Yeah, Dunlop is the alias that has long been used by the royals to liquidate. Dunlop is long been used by the royals to liquidate securities. And in this case, this has been shut down again and then, you know, launched again and then shut down and then launched again and then shut down and launched again. And I can't believe it. I really can't believe it. And so it's suspended in 2009 only to say, hey, we want to request to divide. So suspend the trademark of Dunlop because it had been an act of terrorism if they did it again. That's the way George Dunlop had set this up. Dunlap is the name. But then they're like, okay, if you can't reinstate it, we'd like to divide it. And then divide it into an international class that's this and this over here. But we're going to need that taken care of. And then what is the USTP? Oh my gosh. I love the few times where I've seen this like majorly pushed back. Like this is actually backdated to a date that would not be realistic or legal. But here we go. Fenner Dunlop. And it looks like they're in a warehouse making tires. Chemicals and tires. Chemicals and tires. Just same old, same old. And they just add Fenner. OMG. And then the next one is a Dunlop scooter, a Dunlop watch, Dunlop sporting goods, These people are nuts. But I want to bring all this up because at the end of the day, Cybertech and IBM were heavily liquidated. And 380 billion, and all of the way that this was engineered. All of these companies have one thing in common. They were highly targeted, very systematically, ahead of 9/11 with the intent to profit off the death of Americans. And then there are at least, I thought it was just 42, but I didn't realize a few other things. But then there's this group that they just had these offshore trusts. They were set up in Jeffrey Epstein's little, with Akamai and with Cybertech and with Farmers Bank. See, it requires a presidential sign-on to annex and transfer historical trademarks. And doing so for the Farm Bureau would have required the approval of the family, all U.S. farmers. Like if all of us would have died as potential heirs that they were, they have a whole like bounty system on our heads. I'm on the Death Master Index. They already annexed half of me. I should have been dead by now. But if all of us die, guess what? The president doesn't all of a sudden get to absorb $5 trillion because, okay, and this is where this gets good. So I look at Nancy and there's all these newfound beneficiaries. Some of them are companies, some of them are people. Well, the people overlap, and I cannot believe it, but several of them overlap with the victims of the Deepwater Horizon. And now why that matters is Harry Wilton's patents were siphoned and changed to Howard Hughes. Yeah, they weren't Howard's. Texas Company Securities also liquidated, pretend like it was always part of Texaco, which was the plot in the 60s. That's what, as hard as this seems to like wrap your head around, it's not that hard when we have a really small family that is very unassuming because we don't live beyond our means. George H. Dunlap, despite being the CEO of Nationwide, still farmed a 6-acre farm up until he was 80. And his wife founded Nationwide Children's as a nonprofit organization. That was really her life's mission, is to help kids and health, the health of children. It's not a nonprofit anymore. It's a research facility for children. But the whole point here is that CSC is basically who acquires Mind, who acquires Cybertech, and all of these things. You can go down rabbit hole after rabbit hole after rabbit hole. It's the whole point. But at the end of the day, Y2K was a big push to digitize records and specific records. This had been a long-term plot. And in 1977, when Nelson Rockefeller was vice president and George H.W. Bush was director of the CIA, this is when they reinstate all the insurance companies and they liquidate half of what would have been left in mineral rights to the farmer's estate to Sarah L. Dunlap, who's related to Mary Emma Kerr, Kerr. Well, Kerr is Richard Kerr of the BCCI CIA. So, and then on the back end, it's Little John. And they love the name Little John. If you look it up, it does say that that's Princess Diana's lineage. But the name is completely 100% made up. Like Little St. John, Big St. John. It's all part of the plot. But we should not, as a country, proactively tell people we're going to come after you if you continue stealing our trade secrets when we let them integrate on the back end. And when we have politicians that are accepting securities or royalties from converted shares that are being stolen from historical estates. So when Jamie Dimon is like, hey, U.S., your GDP is just horrible over the last 20 years, 1.7%. No shit. But it's not surprising, Jamie Dimon, that in 2021, a billionaire was created every 17 seconds, because that's what happens when you're liquidating 400 billion at a time. And that when somebody in the United States allows for a bank branch that had been set up for farmers, U.S. farmers, in support of U.S. agriculture and their assets, to operate out of the U.S. Virgin Islands as a DNA bank. A DNA bank with $250 million transfer limits. Now, DNA, I'm glad you brought it up. DNA is the company out of the UK that reincorporates Dunlop and all these other entities. I don't need anyone. I mean, I'm going to get you all the info, but Dunlop is brought back from 1909 with no information, this entity, this record, it shows that it had been federally canceled. You can get to that. But there's nothing other than, hey, it's the Hartfield Rubber Works, and just re-registered. As if it's just been existence, But Pacific Dunlop and a bunch of these are actually set up as trusts. Robert Maxwell kind of mastered the art of foreign entities set up as trusts to liquidate assets offshore. He just wasn't that good, expecting anybody to be better than they are at tracking this stuff down. But hey, it's not just platform technology. See, I happened to work at an annual report financial communications agency during the time when George Bush and Dick Cheney allowed for this to happen. I mean, from 2000 to 2001, 42% of U.S. securities were liquidated offshore, and many of them were manipulated ahead of time and changed to put options, which are betting against them. So you're betting that, the airline industry is going to fail. You're betting that these things are going to happen. And that's a little, you can predict the future, Simpsons, but Pacific Dunlop and these Pacific Dunlop just got reinstated in 2025. And it's Australia. It's important too. But back to Ally. When you are regardless of 9/11, when you are a public company that offers shares to the general public, you have to adhere to specific laws as to how your company must operate. And if, let's say, Transocean owes a fine that has been issued to them for destroying millions of people's lives, not to mention the ocean and a lot of future growth for Americans. But no, if they are ever issued a fine, I look into it, like, where did these fines go to? Because it should leave their books and then have been provided to somebody else. And when I realized that the victims were paid out by Nancy Wilton, the daughter of the gentleman who legitimately developed the patents, but who passed away in the 70s, I just wanted to look into this, And as it turns out, Transocean just said, hey, BP said we're not liable for anything. BP said it, and here's the proof on an amended will that says, hey, this is, the Farm Bureau. You can dump whatever you want on U.S. agricultural land with no liabilities or risks of potential litigation. This is a terrorist activity. And I actually proved it because Epstein was nice enough to use a consistent border on many of the all of the documents. It's all. I actually had a friend, I said, this is the border. All of these documents are leading up to 9/11 and truly liquidate the most ahead of it. This says not to exceed 10 million annually. It was 100. They kind of do it backwards. But when this happens, we look at these, and they're in different counties on different types of documents from different attorneys and different companies, and they all line up and tell the story of entities that have been shut down, not once, not twice, but 3 times, some of them being designated terrorist organizations. But Transocean and their employees overlap. I was like, who are these people? And were their bodies ever recovered? It's a Rockefeller thing. No, they weren't. And I'm not saying those individuals weren't harmed. But when I went to Port Arthur and met with the son of a founder with Harry Wilton, he said that there was some weird things. And he thought that, he said, I would not be surprised if they actually killed Texas company employees. It's the Rockefeller way, put them on that. But anyways, they overlap with a house in New Orleans called the Elms. It's called St. Charles Mansion, known as the Elms, many times throughout history. And if you look it up, Transocean was actually shut down for funding Hitler through a different name and basically stealing coal and oil and gas back ahead of World War II. Okay, so the Elms, and if you Google it, I mean, you'll want to Google it, everybody, because Lyndon Johnson, when JFK is killed, is also living in a house called the Elms in Washington, D.C. It's now owned by, I think, Algeria. But when you actually try to look into what did they pay, what did Lyndon and Lady Bird pay for that? It's like so doctored. They didn't pay anything. They were liquidating the estates of the Stoner family who had a home in D.C. that they used when they were in D.C. They were there often. Christine Steiner, you changed her name to Steiner. But the Elms Country Club is one of what they call the Cumberland, Washington farms. There were 5 of them. Huge tracts of land that were zoned, not just to protect the president, but where the land was most fertile and needed to be protected. So in the 20s, when Harry Wilton fell in love with Helen, and Helen fell madly in love with Harry, it happens in the United States. Anything can happen here. He came here when he was 16 years old, Russian, and he's Jewish. So this isn't an Israeli thing, even though there's what I call them Zionists, very much involved in here. But he alerted the Farm Bureau that there were a group of Standard Oil they're designated spies, assuming the identity, in many cases killing off United States citizens. I mean, when you're basically encouraging the use of biowarfare chemicals on farmland, it's not just farmers they're killing, guys. It's not just farmers. But immediately when I started looking into this, I started pulling those securities. I was like, Delta Airlines. I called up my friend who's at Delta. I was like, listen, it's none of my business, but I know you have access to it. Were there a bunch of securities, kind of like stuff going on around these key dates? And she's like, yeah, but we kind of chalked it up to 9/11 and the anomaly. Who wouldn't, right? Who wouldn't? Well, 42% was only a portion, and they actually set it up to waterfall. And so Helen and Nancy's estates were just fully liquidated. The Farmers Trust that was established in 1867 was just fully liquidated in Stark County in 2022, and that's really when the wheels, I mean, don't you feel like, and I can see where China's like, gotta get that vaccine out. And if you look at the Epstein stuff, they were planning on the vaccine and actually had even named it COVID as of I think it's 2002. So what is this plot? It is World War III. In fact, Epstein's initials that he uses on many aliases, it's WWV3. The CIA's little crypto thing, cryptos, is WWV. It's low frequency 3. And if you see something, say something. They let us know. It's all been a joke, and quite frankly, it's been, I think, one of the worst examples of humanity of all time. I mean, if you think the child trafficking stuff is bad, there's a little kid that climbs out of Buckingham Palace and ties together sheets to escape the royals. So, it has not been good for children. It has not been good for anyone in our country or a lot of countries. It's not that we need to blame, all of Germany. But trust me, we need to the banks in Germany. We're going to come for you. We're coming for you. And JP Morgan Chase. Back to Jamie Dimon. I have the illegal documents that you've been using dating back to, I know Big Poppy tried to kick this off in 81. Anytime they dig up anybody on U.S. soil, the plot's in motion. So Lee Harvey Oswald getting dug up should have been hey, why don't we just leave him there? It's been since 1963. 81? Oh, it was a present for, Diana. I don't know. What the heck? But they dig him up, Emma Goldman, she was a spy from Russia. They brought her back to Chicago in the 20s, let her get buried there. But we don't let John Kennedy Jr. get buried at Arlington? Yeah, but anytime someone gets dug up, we should just look at what the Bushes are doing. I mean, and I say we as the internal CIA team. We should call it the BIA team, the BIA, down by the bayou. But we should look into what the Bushes are doing and just actually shut down the banks. Because BCCI and Union Bank and Trust, the same bank that had been seized from Prescott, went live again. And after 1944, when we send millions of men over to D-Day to kind of play on a stage in front of them, make them billions of dollars. I mean, the Queen was like calculating how much money she's going to get. But if we're going to do that, you better be prepared. And I know who many of you are on U.S. soil. I'm not going to do anything violent. It's not the American way. But it is the American way for you to understand that if you're going to serve this country, it should be enough for you to get your book proceeds. Write your book when you're done in office. You know, just accept your Texas Rangers. That should have been enough. But for you to liquidate Gulf oil and the resources that have been protected. People are like, why did farmers get all that? You cannot frack and source all of this and farm. And they needed water. The state of Ohio just signed a 5-year contract with anyone that has a data center going in on farmland that they can dispose of the water any way they want. Let's just hope it doesn't blow up. Because that would be Les Wexner's plan for New Albany. And by the way, from here on out, no state, regardless of how much money you think it's going to offer you, there's been fewer than 100 jobs based on the data centers that are out in New Albany. And then the other ones that belong to Abercrombie were used to traffic boys, all right? So there's a place for these data centers if you want to build them, and that's the desert. But not the desert that has highly enriched uranium, because that's why Jeffrey Epstein picked his range. So I'm sorry to drop all of this, but Operation Northwoods, it was hard for me. What was the whole plan? Well, the plan was, and I'll tell you about the Hindenburg, but the shoot down a plane and then just change the people's names and have their estates annexed. And that's why Christine Snyder is Christine Steiner. And William Steiner, who is at cancer, supposedly. They changed his name from Rudolph Steiner III to William Steiner because it had long been David and William. They were planning on this being David and William since the 60s. They loved it. Big Papi, the month my cousin David passed away in 92 is when he actually has that quote. It's the same, within days. If the American people ever knew what we did, they would drag us out in the street and hang us, is what Big Papi Bush says in an interview, on record. The same, week that my cousin David passes away, and he was supposed to be flown up and buried. He supposedly was. The cemetery says he's not there, and he was never there. It's just Terry and Helen. But, manipulating graves might be their thing. It's not mine. And U.S. securities, like I said, there's laws here. And then child trafficking. We got to shut down the banks before you can shut down any sort of thing. I mean, no more fines, okay? Because JP Morgan Chase doesn't mind paying $5 million as a payment to somebody versus have to give back $5 trillion. Does this make sense? Right? The fines have done nothing, and the fact that no one has ever been arrested from the amount of corruption that stems from this, especially in Ohio, is really, really, really disappointing. But Cybertech, which they changed the name to make it sound more office-based, but back in the day, it was Union Carbine. Ever hear of it? So Epstein is basically Jeffrey Edward Simpson. A lot of this is just set up to liquidate assets and mineral rights offshore. And this one did it in just stellar fashion by, it says 10 million sheets of paper annually were stored with Akamai and then destroyed. I'm like, wait, what? We gave them all the records of Y2K. And they're like, well, yeah, that was the whole point. So we didn't have to store it, HIPAA. HIPAA. If you see something, say something. In the 1960s, when they were digitizing Social Security, the state of Texas was issuing thousands of Social Security numbers for individuals that they planned to liquidate assets from in an effort to defraud America. Yep. Yeah, Social Security's. So I have an annexed Social Security. My mom has an annexed Social Security. There are 94 million entries in Jeffrey Epstein's bank, and let's hope that's global. Because there were 94 million people who got the vaccine in our country. And these men are kind of a little, people think I'm a little, wait till you see The Epstein stuff that you've seen, and I know all the coding. I know how disturbing it is. Oh, and this Union Carbine is being investigated and shut down back in the day for skinless sausage cartridges. Skinless sausage? Here's another thing that I'm good at, big data. If we look at how many hamburgers that McDonald's is making and distributing throughout the world, there aren't that many cows. And when we think that that's just McDonald's, like where's the beef? Where's the beef? We just have the pig farms blow up. Well, that's going to happen more and more because on the back end, they have massive insurance policies on the lives of the farmers who live there that you never hear anything about. Any family members that do exist are like, oh, you weren't in the will. Oh, here's the amended will. Everything was left to the church. Everything was left to the Farm Bureau. Or they were like, here's your $10,000. And they basically just take over. And from there, it's frack, pipeline, easement, and then turning it into a solar farm. And the solar farms exist to do one thing: power data centers and power underground bunkers. There's not been one state or one county that has had lower utilities or lower gas consistently over a month period since 9/11. In fact, whoop. And how's the price of food? Eggs going well for you? Can you imagine now that there's no pork? I mean, Intel was the largest U.S. pork. There's pork. We just don't know where it's coming from. Pork in a can. They introduced it in 1960s. Pork in a can. But this has been one of the most emotional audits I've ever done. And not just because I know these people. For anyone to have blamed such a horrendously, strategically thought out plan on anyone else in any country, shame on us. Shame on us for Americans for not actually doing the litmus test. And not everyone who accepted royalties from Jeffrey Epstein's network that is powered by Akamai and probably powered by any technology that had been siphoned during 9/11, including my cousins, that insurance that was supposed to detect that fraud, it was basically used to almost actively find the loopholes around it with government systems. But so United States Treasury Department, first things first, we have back-end integrations that were set up in the states of Ohio and Texas for sure, and it was Bob Taft and George W. Bush that facilitated them as governors. It's a fact. From EDS, which is Electronic Data Systems, who paid Cheney, compensated him, they were very much active in manipulating records, and we don't want that. We actually don't want any international-based technology firm that is distributing payments to China integrated with our Department of Justice. It's just, And then, so our utilities and who owns them and who owns the bulk, George and Gladys Dunlap retroactively in 2019, just ahead of 9/11, they not only signed quitclaims on all mineral rights historically titled to the Farm Bureau and any company that their families owned. That's why, right, Patterson. I did look it up. It's Patterson. That's how Epstein got his Rickenbacker access. This is the CIA's plot to take over the United States using the identities of key people and having us, suffer. But Charles Churchill, the names are always staying the same, and they even make up fun little fake people. My grandpa told me this would be the case. And Epstein would be one of them. Maxwell would be one of them. And we should also look into how many passports we should issue somebody from a foreign country. Maxwell had John, Jan, Ivan, Ian, Leslie Jeffers, Leslie Jeffers. Epstein had 2. And then he had numerous international ones. The sweeping of Epstein under the rug is because no one wants to be called or implicated in a terrorist attack, but there were clear facilitators on U.S. soil and the U.S. government making it happen, and they're still there. And anyone who signs on is also granting 100% of their power of attorney. I saw Joe Biden's, so the entire time he was president, he had granted his power of attorney to Standard Oil. That's not a president. That's basically just electing to continue this stupid process. So we're going to need to halt kind of what we're doing. And we're going to need to let King Charles know that you are going to be hunted worse than anyone else, because just because you're king does not give you the right to break every law and harm anyone in your way. Because guess what? You won't be king forever. You won't. There's somebody more royal than you, and everybody knows it. I mean, everybody, really. A little old lady in West Virginia was like, I think your grandma is actually supposed to be queen. I was like, no, it's my mom. It's actually my mom. But, and she deserves it. There's no one other than Diana, who I can't imagine. Who kills the mother of their own children, who is the most amazing, beautiful thing that ever happened to the Windsor family, and profits from it? Disgusting. Ugh. Good luck on the other side there, King Charles.